So what are we really looking for? That question sounds like it's asking an individual a question that is deserves an answer that is specific to whoever I'm asking the question. And so if I ask 10 different people, then they will tell me what they are looking for, which is what they think they are looking for, what they think they want, what they think ultimately will give them happiness. But the question, what are we really looking for, means if our incorrect ideas of what we're looking for fall away and we were left with the right answer, that is, this is what I was always looking for, this is what the seeking is really about, what would that answer be? And so the question, what are we really looking for, is really a statement that is saying what is really available, that is known as enlightenment, is this. And the answer to the question, what are we really looking for, is continuous unbroken peace of mind in daily living. Continuous unbroken peace of mind regardless of the circumstance that we find ourselves in. Now, this is absolutely crucial, as far as I'm concerned, for a seeker to understand, to come across, to think about at a certain point of the seeking. It becomes the beacon that keeps us on track. Without this question, so I suggest that a seeker asks themselves this question because they recognize, actually, it's a good question. What am I really looking for? I should ask this question and I should come up with an answer that is correct or that I agree with. And often, if we ask ourselves a question and come up with our own answers, there's a good chance that we're going to be off the mark because we tend to make mistakes. And so it's always good to see what the teachings are pointing at, what the teachings are telling us. So that's what a teaching is. It gives us a whole lot of hints and clues, and it just waits for us to hear them as they have always been presented. And so a teaching and teachings essentially help us to not make as many mistakes, because they're essentially saying, well, this is the answer, but don't just take the answer. You need to work back and get that answer. You need to work it out for yourself. You need to come to this answer for yourself. But I'll give you the answer to start with, so at least you can work back and know what the answer is, but you have to come to it for yourself. And the teachings sort of go further than just giving the answer, but they'll even give a whole lot of points of contemplation that will help, potentially help at the answer sinking in and going, oh, I get it. I actually get the answer for myself. So what am I really looking for as a seeker? As a seeker, what am I really looking for? Ramesh used to say, this is a great question for a seeker to, if a seeker was sitting in front of Ramesh, he would say, it's a great question for you to ask. Ask me anything. But one of the questions I suggest you ask is, what am I as a seeker really looking for? And Ramesh's answer would be, first, that is a great question. Why is it a great question? Because if you're going to spend years or a lot of your time focused as an earnest direction, it prevents you from having to go down a whole lot of paths and potentially for is peace of mind in daily living. the next incarnation deal with their happiness in their life. You know, we're often thinking that we're looking for happiness in the next life, right? So if a seeker is seeking salvation after death, for example, or salvation in the next life, then essentially they are not looking for happiness for this human being in this life. So it means that they are essentially not aware of what liberation is, not aware of what they are really looking for. So what is continuous unbroken peace of mind? The continuous unbroken part links in with regardless of the circumstance we find ourselves in, because broken peace of mind, non-continuous or broken peace of mind, means peace of mind that is there and then it's shattered and replaced by its opposite. Us, which is suffering. And that is what breaks our peace of mind, covers up our peace of mind. And so when we have this answer, what we're looking for is continuous unbroken peace of mind. It's very important if we're going to investigate it for ourselves and come up with the what that allow us to know what that is really pointing at. So as I've said, broken peace of mind or non-continuous peace of mind is peace of mind sometimes and peace of mind not at other. It isn't a feeling of blissed outness or even the feeling. I feel like a sense of pleasure, some sort of pleasure, if there is this feeling of peace. What peace of mind, as spoken about within this teaching framework, what peace of mind is the absence of suffering. It's the presence of the human experience where the human being will continue to be in circumstance, continue to experience circumstances either pleasurable or painful, meaning circumstance is either going to be in line with the person's preferences, that would be pleasurable, or out of line with the person's preferences, and that would be painful. So, you know, if you break your favorite coffee cup, small as it may be, it's not your preference for that to have happened. And so it is a small amount of pain. If you stub your toe, that is physical pain. If you lose your wallet with money in it, or someone steals your money, or you have to pay more for an item that you need, or a bill comes in that you weren't expecting, a bill that you were expecting, frankly, is financial pain. Now, because we call it financial pain doesn't mean that it's the end of the world, or that pain has to be extreme. There's a very large spectrum of what circumstance is. But circumstance is always either pleasure or pain. So this description is very useful at us being able to understand the components of our daily life better. So circumstance, always either pleasure or pain. That's all, never anything else. Your circumstances, remember that it's either pleasure or pain, and you'll start labeling it, not in a harmful way, but in a way that allows you to hopefully end up with a relationship to the flow of life that is a little different to the relationship that has developed in a way, what we could say unconsciously, that is the relationship to the flow of life, the relationship to pleasure and pain, the relationship to circumstance that creates the uncomfortableness with oneself. And part of that shift is to understand that circumstance is either pleasure or pain, because the truth of the matter is that as our relationship with circumstance has developed, it's developed in a way where there is an underlying, deeply ingrained belief that circumstance is a defining factor to who I am. There is a deeply ingrained belief that is more than just a fleeting belief, but it's become essentially part of who we know ourselves as on a deeply, deeply ingrained, in a deeply, deeply ingrained way. And so what that means is that when circumstance happens, the circumstance automatically is received and processed by our sense of self, by our deeply ingrained identity. And that deeply ingrained identity has become convinced. It sort of got hypnotized very slowly through the developing process from a baby to adolescent and so on, to believe that what it is added to by pleasure and taken away from by pain. And so that means that life is continually creating an inflated or a deflated sense of self. So no wonder we feel uncomfortable in life, because essentially we have a sense of self that is highly fragile or highly interdependent with circumstance that is continually in change. And so there can't be any consistency. It means how we know ourselves as has no stability, has no consistency, has no permanence. And really, the fact that this has happened is pretty good news. Not in that this happening has delivered a positive outcome or a positive sense of self or a comfortable sense of self. It hasn't. It's what's created the uncomfortable sense of self. But so you might say, so why do you say this is great news? I say it's great news because it can change. Because what our identity is essentially mistaken. It's a conclusion that was formed by the cognitive process, not where someone actually sat down and said, okay, I think it's about time that I form a sense of self and I know who I am. So let me ask this question and I'll spend the next 3 days coming up with an answer. No, it doesn't happen like that. It happens very gradually as life impacts the system and the awareness that is always here registers the experience that we have from a very young age of a baby starting to experience the senses and figuring out the consistencies of things and forming an idea, oh, that must be an important person. That's where I get my food from and my care from. Without it being a thought, just it gets formed on a essentially pre-thought cognitive level. And our identity gets formed starting from then and carrying forward based on how we are in the world. And it seems like it's a fairly standard identity that gets put in place. So even though people's circumstance is radically different, the way that the experience of life, the experience of the body, the experience of pleasure and pain is registered, is it creates this identity that says what I am is added to by pleasure and taken away from by pain. So the good news is that that's an error that got put in place, a very complex cognitive process that creates what we can call the human condition prior to freedom from that particular human condition. The freedom is still a human condition. It's just a different human condition that doesn't lead to suffering. And what happens when that identity is challenged and dissolves is that essentially we're left with another experience of life, an experience, identity that feels like circumstance is adding or taking away from it. That identity is gone. So now circumstance will continue to happen, but it won't be registered in our system in the same way. It will still be felt, it will still be experienced as pleasurable or painful, but the additional narrative, the psychological reaction, the psychological story, the thinking mind that goes into extensive conclusions about what this means that this has happened, isn't there to do its previous job. And so what the human experience then is that, you know, people, there's a good example today is my girlfriend mentioned that someone made a comment because she went through and cleared up some friends on Instagram or Facebook or something. And someone she didn't know got taken off the list, and they wrote a message, you know, upset at this. And so there was a story about what that meant. Whereas from this side, it was just a clearing of people she didn't recognize names, and it was nothing personal. And yet from the other side, the person saw that this had happened, got some notification or something, and felt like it warranted a message and an explanation and all sorts of things. Maybe even a retaliation. And so the end of suffering would be something like those things are still going to happen. Oh, well, these things happen. Someone maybe doesn't like me. That can be one of the reasons why something like that happens. And instead of it being a psychological story where it's like, oh, I have to make them like me, I have to convince myself that they are wrong for not liking me, so at least I can feel valid. All of that falls away. And the reason it falls away is because our sense of self is not determined anymore by these circumstances. And so when the circumstance happens, there's a letting go of it very quickly. It's like, who cares? Who cares that someone unfriended me? We don't even look. And when I say who cares, the reason that it's not important anymore is the one that cares, the one that cared, the one that felt that if they got unfriended, that would be an attack, that would be a proof that they are not worthy or they are not good enough. Basically, it would be not in line with their preference, so it would be pain. And then the story about what that means is the attitude towards the circumstance. And that identity used to, basically, that was its job, to form all these conclusions about itself based on what other people were thinking, what other people were doing, how the circumstance unfolded. And that identity actually dissolves. It dissolves when we start realizing, when we start hearing your true nature is unchanging, is unaffected by circumstance, is already complete, is already happy, is already whole. What you really are at your core is not dependent on outcomes, is not added to or subtracted from because of outcomes. So when we think about this, if we think about it, like, what does that mean? It means that what we already are is happy because it's not unhappy, because it's not feeling that it needs to become, that it needs the future to deliver. And why is it not feeling that? The reason that it's not feeling that is because it can't think in those terms. It doesn't create the thoughts that are the uncomfortableness. And this is why it's called our true nature. Our true nature is happiness, and happiness is peace of mind. Happiness for the human being is not the happiness that we are convinced, the word happiness, for the most part, is associated with a positive feeling. And so if I say I'm looking for happiness, sometimes people jump up and down going, no, we're not looking for happiness, because they've been seeking for long enough to realize seeking is not about happiness in the traditional use of the word, i.e. happiness where you are joyful and you are cheery and you are, the life of the party and you're always laughing and lighthearted and enjoying amazing holidays and doing everything that you enjoy. That's a happiness through outcomes. And the happiness that is really available, the happiness or what we are really seeking, is peace of mind. So happiness through peace of mind, as opposed to happiness through outcomes. So if you want, you could just let's not use the word happiness, because happiness means pleasure. I mean, I'm trying to make it very clear that in this context, I don't use the word happiness to mean happiness through pleasure. That is pleasure. In the context of these teachings, happiness means continuous, unbroken peace of mind. So someone might say, well, why don't you just say peace of mind? We're looking for peace of mind. Yes, I do. Sometimes I'll say we're looking for peace of mind. But that is the human happiness. When we have continuous, unbroken peace of mind, if someone says, are you happy? You say, yes. And they say, why are you happy? It doesn't seem like you have anything out of the ordinary. And you say, my happiness is not a happiness through outcomes, but my happiness has presented itself in the form of peace of mind. So that's why I keep saying, what are we really looking for? We're looking for happiness, because we are. It is correct to look for happiness, but let's be clear what the happiness that's available is. The happiness that requires our attention is happiness through continuous, unbroken peace of mind. So if we see ourselves seeking happiness in outcomes, hopefully a realization that that is what's happening kicks in. And then another thought could arise based on a deepening understanding that says, there goes the old habit of seeking happiness through outcomes. And we can maybe know that that's a result of the old identity, the identity that was formed and has this idea about itself, i.e. added to by pleasure, outcome, circumstance, certain positive outcomes, circumstance, and is taken away by negative outcomes. So what that identity is continually doing is creating a story about how it's going to get more pleasure, 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 so that it can be more complete, 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 which means in its mind, that's when I will be happy, because it goes to its experience now and it says, no, I can't say I'm happy, but I understand why I'm not happy. It must be because I don't have the perfect job, the perfect car. In fact, forget about the perfect job. I'd like no job. Or it comes up with also, if it then gets to not have a job, when that's what it thinks its happiness will be found in, it'll still find the uncomfortableness there, the suffering there. And it will know intuitively, I'm not happy. And so it will come up with another thing that, oh, it must be that I need my soulmate or whatever. And it can spend a lifetime flipping from one outcome that it's convinced will give it happiness onto the next. And so, once again, teachings come along with some hints as to what the problem is and how that problem can change. So the hint is your happiness is not to be found in outcomes. Happiness is the end of suffering. So what is suffering? Suffering arises, in practical terms, suffering arises in 5 main forms. And it's very important to know how the suffering arises so we can spot it. Why is it important for us to spot it? Because peace of mind, which is what we're really looking for, is the end of suffering. And so each time we see the suffering thinking happen, we can understand at least what our unhappiness is, and there may be scope for that thinking to diminish as it's understood, as it's seen. So if we know that one of the forms of suffering is expectation. So the 5 forms of suffering are guilt, blame, pride, worry and anxiety, expectation and attachment to outcomes. Now, those 5 forms of suffering, they're different in how they feel and what the narrative and psychological movement at the base of that feeling that are all different. Now, the reason that they exist, the first 3, guilt, blame, and pride, are based on a deeply ingrained part of the identity that sees itself, knows itself as an independent entity that is completely responsible for how it functions in life. That too gets put in place gradually as we grow older, from a baby, and the notion, concept, belief that gets put in place based on how life presents itself on the surface, right? So you can't expect the system to necessarily form a different conclusion if on the surface it seems that it is all happening a particular way. Then it makes sense that the conclusion is going to be that. And so the conclusion formed is, I am the doer. I am a separate, independent entity that is in complete control and is the author, is the instigator. The doer is the word used in this teaching. The doer of whatever I produce, any thoughts, any speech, any actions, any creation or outcomes are my responsibility because I created them of my own free will. That is the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership. And so we see the other in the same way. We see the other as the doer, an independent entity that is completely in control of their thoughts and their feelings and their actions and their speech. And so when that assessment of ourself and therefore the other is there, guilt, blame, and pride can set in. It's the basis on which guilt, blame, and pride can arise. Guilt is an attitude towards how we function, an attitude towards how we think, an attitude towards how we speak, an attitude towards the behaviors and the personality we have, an attitude to the way that we interact with other people that judges our actions as valid or invalid, valid relative to our sense of self. And so if we are delivering outcomes, thought patterns or behaviors or ways of interacting with others that we don't like, that we don't see as beneficial, that we would say, if it was up to me, I would do it differently, which really means the way it currently is not our preference. When the belief in personal doership sees that, it sort of gives itself a bit of a slap across the face. Why are you doing it like this? You shouldn't do it like this. You're worthless. And that is the sense of guilt and shame. It looks at something you might have done in the past, where you might not have owned up to something, you might have lied about something, you might have got caught out in a lie, and it feels very guilty about that. You might not have helped a friend. In the case of the Bible story where Saint Peter, one of Jesus's apostles, at the time when Jesus was being arrested, and they were looking for his followers and his friends, Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times, and this was predicted by Jesus. You will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And in hindsight, Saint Peter looks back and felt very guilty for his denying his knowledge of who Jesus was. And he did it out of fear of being arrested. The attitude that allows that guilt and that shame to be there is, I shouldn't have acted that way. I shouldn't have thought those things, or I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have felt the fear. Right? And that is based on this attitude that I control of the fear, the thinking, the explanations, the words that came out, the behaviors, all of that. And so then the sense of personal doership says, oh, you're such a failure. And what the concepts being put forward here suggest is that we are not the doers. And so this attitude of personal doership needs to be considered, needs to be looked at, may be looked at and seen to be flawed. Why is it said that we are not the doers? Well, there are 2 perspectives you can look at. One is that we are not the doers because life is a creation happening according to God's will. Life is a creation happening according to cosmic laws. Life is a predetermined story. Life is a dream. Life is an illusion. All of these words have been, and descriptions have been mentioned in wisdom teachings for thousands of years that are highlighting that life, as we know, the experience of life is maybe not as it seems, is maybe not what it appears to be, that the world of form may not be as formful and real and solid and objective as our experience of it suggests. Life is a dream, a creation unfolding exactly as it is created to unfold. Not even created according to laws of cause and effect and laws of physics. Under this explanation, laws of cause and effect and physics and time are all essentially illusory, all part of the part of the creation of time and space, which means a creation that at its base has time and space, but that time and space has been put into place. So the manifestation refers to the manifested creation. Now, this implies that life might be much more in line with what we are starting to understand as virtual realities, something that is not as objectively real as it appears. Now, on the basis that life is not what it appears, not unfolding as it appears on the surface, that means that our assessment of being the ones that are in charge of how we think and how we speak and how we act could be completely off the mark. It could be that how we are functioning, how the body and the thoughts are functioning, are imposed in each moment exactly as they would be in a pre-recorded movie, where they happen not because there is some individual that makes them happen, but rather because there's a sort of a preordained, a pre-written, a pre-created script that is playing out exactly as it's meant to play out. So the idea that life is a dream doesn't make any sense if someone is just listening to it, because their experience of how it appears suggests otherwise, and suggests that there's no reason to think life a virtual reality or a dream, or a creation according to God's will, some omniscient creator that has created all of this, or at least our experience that we know as life. So if we were to talk about this to someone off the street, they'd say, well, I can't see any reason to think that. Why would a seeker start to move in that direction, move towards maybe seeing life that way, maybe even not only seeing it, but then experiencing it? Maybe not only just experiencing it, but knowing the other to be false. The main reason is that when seeking happens, it happens because we have realized that life is suffering, and the movement has been a movement towards it's time for a change, that it's this suffering that needs to be looked at, that so questions start to arise. What is all this about? Why am I here? And inevitably that intuitive sense, that movement leads us towards teachings, wisdom teachings that start to resonate with us. And lo and behold, when we listen to the teachings, when we read the teachings that are resonating with us, in ways where we get a sense of this is the truth, because it often starts popping our beliefs that aren't seen as beliefs. And as the teachings start popping the beliefs and they start falling away, little things at first, there is more and more resonance, more and more faith, more and more of a sense that this is the information I need. This is actually delivering the new perspective that is allowing the old perspective to fall away. And as that resonance, as that trust in the teachings develops, there is more inclination to not doubt it as much as one would if one isn't resonating, one isn't on that path. The other explanation which is a more practical explanation and doesn't require someone to take the big step, which requires faith, which is not something you can generate, but not only faith, but maybe even a capacity to continue making the error of believing. So that notion that everything is predetermined because it is a creation of source may convince someone and may bring about very significant change, but at some point there'll probably be a questioning about, is this actually true? Even for someone that has felt it to be very true. And at that point, it might be seen that there needs to be something of a backup perspective that also confirms that we are not the doer, that doesn't require us to continue to believe something that maybe is not confirmable. And the other explanation is that if we assume that the world of materialism is true enough, we just need to look at the fact that even from a materialistic point of view, we are not the doers. Why are we not the doers from a materialistic point of view? From a materialistic point of view, we are a biological and psychological entity, a human being with consciousness, because the consciousness is here, whether we take a materialistic view or life is not at all what it seems view. There is consciousness functioning through the human being. That is what allows us to be aware and to contemplate our own existence. There is the sense of I am, I exist. And that human being, the biological entity, essentially was formed by life, was grown by life, was introduced into life by life, and is functioning according to life's rules, according to life's design, the design that life injected into the human being. We can't claim ownership over the fact that we have eyes that work and the brain that processes things and immune systems that fight disease. And those are all developments that life developed. And we happen to be endowed with those developments because that is the vehicle through which that consciousness functions. And when we look at it, the thinking, the speaking, the behaviors, the personality are all aspects of that. And so the terminology that is used here is your genes and up-to-date conditioning. Now, genes aren't talking about one aspect of the human body, as might be the case in medical discussion, where you have all sorts of things and genes. Genes in this context basically means the DNA blueprint that was put in place or came into existence when the sperm and the egg came together, and that all there is the genes, essentially. What is referred to here as your genes is what that blueprint has turned into, which means every single part of the physical body, including the brain and its structure and all of the outputs of that structure. However, that the genes or the DNA, that blueprint that has grown in life, hasn't grown in some insulated, isolated vacuum. It has grown in essentially the laboratory of life. And life is in each moment delivering new conditioning into the environment that body develops in. And the body is developing all the time. It didn't stop developing at the age of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, or when we get to 20, we go, oh, now I've stopped developing. It's always changing. it's getting older, and it's in a continuous movement according to the blueprint and the environment in which that growing blueprint exists. And so if we can get our head around that and stop seeing things separate, we'll see that genes and up-to-date conditioning essentially are not separate. And so what it's saying is there is a biological entity with a psychological component to it that has been put in place by life, and that in each moment the human being is exactly the way it is in that moment, which is never before been that way and never again will be that way. It is in that moment exactly one way according to two factors, the genes and up-to-date conditioning, neither of which factor has the human being ever been in control of. And so in a particular moment, the person finds themselves in a particular circumstance, and there are thoughts, there are feelings, there are emotions, responses, actions, words, and all of that is happening exactly as it has to happen given the fixed components in that particular moment, meaning the circumstance exactly the way it is, and the person's genes and up-to-date conditioning exactly the way they are. And if this is sort of understood, because we're on the materialistic explanation here, in a mathematics sort of sense, and the DNA, the structure can be displayed mathematically, and so can the circumstance be displayed mathematically, that it could be seen that the numbers dictate the answer, essentially. And so if anything was different, if the circumstance was different, it would be different numbers in the circumstance, which would mean a different answer. And in this case, the answer is referring to, let's say, the response or the reaction or the feelings, whatever took place in the person, was an outcome because of everything being exactly the way it was. Now, our thinking doesn't appreciate this, and our thinking says, oh, I should have acted differently. There it is. What a joke. That thinking shows that there is not an appreciation that everything happens because of all the variables being set up a particular way in that moment. What that thinking has done, it has inserted into the mix a variable that doesn't really exist, and that is the idea of a me doer that is sort of separate from the circumstance, separate from the genes conditioning, and is this free will agent, this volitional entity that has chosen how it will act and how it will think and how it will feel. And so all of the movements that come out of this biological, psychological entity are by the psychological entity or identity of personal doership are by sleight of hand attributed to this doer identity that doesn't exist except as an idea. And so what's happened is that in this thinking process, what is really happening is overlooked. So instead of the outcome being attributed to genes and up-to-date conditioning, or attributed to the human instrument as it is according to everything that came before, the 13.5 billion years that came before, has resulted in things lining up exactly the way that they have. That isn't appreciated. That's not the attitude that has been put in place by life. That's not the identity that has been put in place. The identity is the identity of personal doership, and says, oh, these words happen because I, as a separate independent entity that is unaffected and wasn't determined or influenced by everything that came before, I, as a volitional entity, did that. And so then we feel guilt. That's what happened in the case of St. Peter in that moment. Jesus, in the story about St. Peter, and didn't blame him for it, as he didn't blame who was the disciple that betrayed him for the coin, for the money, and went and kissed Jesus. These are all stories. I don't know if they're true. Probably not. Who cares? Doesn't really matter. The point is, the metaphors in the story, as far as I'm concerned, is what we need to mine for these, and they exist in the Jewish tradition, in the Islamic tradition, in the Hindu tradition. There's equally as many parables in and stories and metaphors in all of the traditions. I'm just picking one of them, and I don't have a great affinity towards one or the other. Judas was the disciple that betrayed Jesus, and Judas also felt a tremendous amount of guilt, according to how the story unfolds, such that after he got his 15 pieces of silver for pointing out which of the people was Jesus by giving him a kiss on the cheek, he felt so guilty that he hung himself on a tree, and the 15 pieces of silver were found on the floor. And whereas Jesus, the attitude, assuming Jesus is a representation of wisdom, the attitude towards Judas was, this is what was going to unfold. This is my destiny. This is how my destiny is going to unfold. So along the same lines, when the guards came to arrest Jesus, St. Peter got out his sword and reported. I say this is stories because I don't want people to think, when I'm saying this, that I have a belief about what the story is saying. To me, it's a story, may or may not have happened, not so important whether it happened or it didn't happen. So in the story, St. Peter cut off the ear of one of the guards, and instead of allowing that to happen and trying to get away, Jesus stopped him, supposedly reattached the ear to the guard's head so that the damage was undone. And he essentially surrendered to, this is my destiny. This is what I'm destined to go through. And the guard is just an instrument through which my destiny is going to be carried out. So instead of feeling blame towards Judas and towards Peter, who would deny him 3 times, Jesus looked at that as a happening. It was just the unfolding. And so there was my projection, maybe there was, but it's how the stories are delivered, no blame towards the other. Because the identity of personal doership is not there, and therefore guilt, which is the attitude to one's own actions that are maybe not delivering pleasure, but delivering some form of pain. The attitude to the other's actions, where they deliver pain and not pleasure. And the attitude to one's own actions that deliver positive outcomes, pleasure. That attitude of pride, the attitude of blame, the attitude of guilt can't arise because the belief that I am the doer isn't there. And the belief I am the doer, it falls away when it's seen to be so implausible, when it's seen that there is a belief that has created an entity that doesn't exist, an entity that is a separate, independent, volitional identity. Whereas in fact, what there is a biological, psychological instrument, which is a result of the genes and up-to-date conditioning. And therefore, the speaking that is happening through this body-mind organism is a happening according to God's will or cosmic law. Cosmic law, in this case, means the laws of materialism, because we're talking about the materialistic explanation. And this means when it's seen, not as a belief. It's no point someone going, oh, I think I listened to a talk, can't remember the guy's name. Oh, Roger, that's right. And he said that we're not the doers because of, I don't know, genes and conditioning, up-to-date conditioning. That's right. Yeah, something like that. So no need to feel guilt and blame and pride. If that's your understanding of non-doership, or someone who goes, oh no, I listen to Roger every week and I'm sure that we're not the doers because I think he really knows his stuff and he keeps saying it. That either of those are sort of a belief. It's not known for yourself, but how do we know it for ourselves? Because it came up a couple of times in some talks that I was having with people this week, where they say, I just don't feel like I'm not. I said, don't worry about how you feel. Life on an experiential level feels very different to the truth of the matter, let's say. That there is a difference between the practical and the theoretical, and both the practical and the theoretical are true, and yet they sort of say different things. But different, not in a contradictory way, but in a paradoxical, complementary way. So what's an example of the difference between practical and theoretical? So once again, on mathematics explains a lot about the physics of the universe. If we assume the universe is a closed system, if I do this now and I'm moving the air particles, that is essentially affecting the whole. That my moving of the hands has changed every part of the universe. It's a ripple effect throughout the universe. Now, that is theoretically correct. In practice, the force that my hand is imposing on the air is not going to deliver any practical change or practical effect, 10 meters away from me. And yet, on a theoretical basis, there will be a change in every part of the universe because of the moving of the hands. But in practical terms, there is no effect of me moving the hands. Now, that doesn't mean that, in practical terms, there's no effect, so it doesn't exist. The effect doesn't exist. It does. The effect exists. But in practical terms, you don't notice the effect. So we might, in terms of the feeling or the practical, feel like the doer, which doesn't mean we are the doer. So in theory, we might not be the doer. So if someone says to me, I just don't feel that I'm not the doer. So, okay, what is the teaching really saying? The teaching's saying this. It's saying that you are not the doer, whether you feel it or not, on the simple basis. It's sort of grade 5 or maybe 6 or 7 understanding. The reason it doesn't get understood, and believe me, I've spoken to people with incredible intelligence that work in jobs and do research and have an incredible intelligence, and still the notion just sort of falls flat. Now, the reason the notion of non-doership falls flat is not because it's a complicated notion, but rather because the identity of doership is very strong, even in very intelligent people, and it prevents what is being said from being appreciated. when it's appreciated, we realize what a simple concept it is, what a simple notion it is. So the teaching is essentially saying what I've said, that we are a result of the genes and up-to-date conditioning. The egg and the sperm come together, a blueprint is there, and the human body grows. It grows in an environment, and any thoughts, any feelings, any emotions from the point of conception onwards are all a result of that particular design. And so we are not the creator of our thoughts, our actions, our moods, but rather we are the output of this in movement design of life. I am an output. My thoughts are an output. My sense of self is an output. My words are an output. My hand moving is an output. I am an output. That's all it's saying. And the guilt is not the doing of someone either. There is no doer of the guilt. The guilt is also part of the biological, psychological instrument that has been developed by life. So even the guilt is not something that is our doing. The pride, the expectation, the worry, all of those are happening according to cosmic law. So hopefully something that I've said, my hammering home, it's not a hard concept, like really grade 5, grade 6. So often we, in spirituality, we like it when physics starts sort of talking in terminology, or not necessarily terminology, in concepts that we sort of are on track with as seekers, oneness and interconnectivity and the sort of nature of consciousness and the illusory nature of life, the non-causality, the spontaneity of life. All of these things are aspects that physics can agree on and is observing more and more as there are more and more physicists studying the nature of life from a physics point of view. And so we can get lost and think that the understanding is very complicated, and now finally physics, with all of its complications and its complexity, is starting to see what the sages have seen for thousands of years, which sort of implies the sages had this great capacity of seeing the very complex. And now physics is giving us these answers. And it's not really doing that whatsoever, in my mind. What's happening is there are people that are observing life on the micro level because it's interesting for other objectives, really, for them in terms of development of projects that require quantum mechanics and what have you. And so they're doing observations and experiments, and the implications that come out of what they're seeing in these experiments is what's important. The implication is, I simply am not a separate entity with volition. I too must be part of the whole and not separate from it, and therefore completely influenced by the whole. It's a very simple implication that might come out of a very complex experiment, but the implication is something that you could have without the complex experiment. It's just that the identity of doership is so deeply ingrained that a lot of people need a lot of convincing, a lot of proof, in a way, for the system to go past its beliefs. And the physicists might be in a lucky position because they're doing these experiments and they're thinking about this and they're thinking about these things that can allow the implication, a very simple implication, oh, I'm not the doer, which, it doesn't have to be a physicist. You think physicians, doctors should really understand that, just in the same way that someone's kidneys function independent of a doer, that a doctor should be able to see someone's thinking is a function, just like the processing of body substances through the liver. And the way that we feel, the way that we act is all completely determined functions. And where is the individual other than an output of these functions? Where is the one that we can say, you are responsible for what you did and you could have done it differently? I mean, I'm not suggesting that we say that the person is not responsible in such a way that there are no consequences for the actions, because even if there is no doer, consequences will impact and influence how society develops and how the non-doer functions. So the consequence might still need to be there, punishments, etc., and rules, and if they're broken, consequences to the breaking of the rule. But in delivering the penalty, it doesn't mean that we're saying, oh, there's a penalty because you're the doer. The penalty is simply a consequence to an action. The question of a doer is a different thing altogether. The question of a doer comes down to our psychological attitude to whatever happens through us and to what we see happening through the others. So we can penalize the other and then not hate them on a simple basis that we understand that this is life unfolding. This all stemmed out of the 5 forms of suffering. Guilt, blame, and pride, they're the first 3. I'll try and make the other 2 quicker. Worry and anxiety, expectation, and attachment to outcomes. So this goes back to the first part of the identity that I spoke about at the beginning of the satsang, before the identity of personal doership. And these 2 parts are like 2 sides of a coin. They make up the psychological me that is essentially what creates, while it exists, the sense of uncomfortableness, because it is the false sense of who we are based on deeply ingrained beliefs that are so unquestioned and so essentially believed to be the truth, that what stems out of that tightly knit set of beliefs feels like a concrete me, a concrete sense of self, and it's very uncomfortable. The true nature is the absence of that. And the true nature doesn't feel uncomfortable because it's not a belief system that creates an idea of its self-worth based on this and that. It's just very quiet and still and okay already, at peace. So the worry and expectation, worry and anxiety, worrying essentially about what the future will deliver. And because we believe that our happiness is dependent on outcomes, then the story is, and what if the outcome is this, what that will mean. And we have this whole idea about what it means about me and my happiness and my life and what have you. And similarly, expectation and attachment to outcomes is the same idea that what I am is very much dependent on outcomes, and I feel crappy at the moment and uncomfortable at the moment must be because I don't have outcomes, because life is not perfect. And so we create all these ideas of what we imagine the perfect ideal of our life to be, and set up expectations of what will deliver happiness, which is essentially outcomes. Soulmate is the number 1 leading attachment to outcome. That's attachment to love, essentially. And money is the other one. So we deeply believe that we will be more complete when we have love from the other, and when we have financial resources, that means we can get more and more physical pleasures. Then in close third place is achievement, creativity, being good at things. Because if I'm good at things, I can feel good about myself and people will love me. So I can love myself for the good things that I have achieved, which is the wrong reason to love yourself. And other people will love me because they'll see all the good things that I've achieved. So you can see that soulmate, money, success is all about I will be complete when I get these things in the future. And so that identity falling away, all those thoughts, all those motivations fall away. And not only the thoughts, but the sense of lack that drives us to seek happiness through outcomes. It's a feedback loop. If we didn't feel unhappy because the psychological identity was put in place at a very young age, if that had been put in place, we wouldn't end up forming the conclusion, oh, I must be feeling bad because I don't have these things. Because we wouldn't be feeling bad, so we wouldn't say, I must be feeling bad because I don't have these things. We'd be feeling fine, like everything is okay, not feeling uncomfortable with life. And we wouldn't then be craving all of these things that we inevitably crave when the uncomfortableness is put in place. So understanding that these are the 5 forms of suffering, and understanding that what we're really looking for is peace of mind in daily living, which is the dissolving of the suffering, and understanding that expectation will sneak in the back door and we will start expecting the end of suffering because we've heard about it. And so then our expectation says, oh, that sounds like something good. I will be happy when I have that. So it becomes a new form of expectation. And so understanding the different forms of suffering means we'll catch out. We'll start to see all the different forms of suffering that arise. Now, it's very important to see this as suffering that arises not because of your doing, but rather it arising in a particular body-mind organism, meaning it is arising in a particular set of genes and up-to-date conditioning that is very specific in that moment. And so to the satsangs with slightly different years, what has happened, I see it over and over, and it's a form of suffering that gets in the way of the movement happening, is where the seeker is attached essentially to peace of mind, to the end of suffering, because they've heard it. So a lot of teachings won't talk about peace of mind or the end of suffering because that teaching doesn't deal with the forms of suffering in a sort of conceptual way using clarity. It uses a different approach. So I'm not suggesting that because it doesn't use conceptual forms and clarity that it's not good. It just is using a different methodology. And because it uses a different teaching, uses a different methodology, and doesn't create an intellectual basis on which certain forms of suffering can get caught out, it will choose to leave out an explanation about liberation is the end of suffering, and will leave out all of these explanations about what suffering is, etc., because it understands that the seeker is just going to get attached to that and will just have another job to do, which is to undo that attachment. And we don't have the tools to do that because we're not explaining it in intellectual, conceptual terms. Whereas this teaching is, so it can bring in something that is going to be a potential problem, because it is at the same time explaining that this could be a problem, so keep an eye out for it. It is going to become a problem, that's okay, But when it becomes a problem, hopefully we'll be able to catch it. We'll be able to see it. The seeker will be able to say, oh, I am attached to outcomes. So the teaching about that I've been talking about today of non-doership, not telling you to stop your suffering, right? Someone might say, yes, it is. You're saying that peace of mind is the end of suffering. And well, I'm after peace of mind. I'm going to make it happen. So I have to stop the suffering. Listen to the teaching as if it is a set of descriptions, not a set of prescriptions, because that's really what it is. The teaching is new conditioning that, as it's delivered, may become part of your up-to-date conditioning. And the human being functions according to its genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so the teaching is delivered not as a prescription to a doer. There is no doer to do it. There is only the human instrument, genes and up-to-date conditioning, and the teaching is throwing out new conditioning. And it's much more effective if the descriptions are seen as descriptions, which means notice to the extent that it is possible. So I'm not even asking a doer to notice. This is more conditioning that says, instead of trying to get an outcome, just let's see if this movement happens. Suffering arises, and the thought arises based on the genes and up-to-date conditioning that says this suffering is happening simply because the combination of genes and up-to-date conditioning dictate that it happens. Not my doing, but a happening. Now, if that were to happen, that's got no attachment to outcome in it. That's not saying, there's that damn suffering again. Let me try and bring it to an end. That would be the attachment to outcome kicking in without us realizing it. Whereas if the movement is there, what I am observing in the present moment is suffering, and therefore, if the suffering is arising, it must be there because of the genes and up-to-date conditioning that life put in place, which therefore means it is destiny for in this moment there to be suffering. So the expectation of changing things is not beneficial. In fact, it is a form of suffering. So if you listen to the talks, it's very easy to hear the words. Sometimes the sentences are phrased in words that seem very much like a prescription, very much like I'm talking to someone who is a doer and telling them to do something. Abide in I am, for example. Abide in I am is the suggestion that when thinking or suffering, the thinking mind, the blame, the shame, the expectation, the worry, when that's happening, a thought might arise that says, stop. And that stop thought is a bookend to the thinking. It's not telling you to try to stop. It's just saying stop and be. And if that happens, right, that is what we can call abiding in I am. Now, that is abiding in I am is happening. There isn't someone doing abiding in I am. What has happened is thinking was happening. The thought stop, which is like the final bookend thought, happened. And abiding in I am is happening. So it is a description of what might happen and not a prescription of what to do. Whereas if I say, whenever possible, abide in I am, it can easily be heard as, no, but Roger, you're telling me to abide in I am. Hear it from so the belief in personal doership will hear everything as an instruction to it. Whereas you can go back over the talks, and if you listen to it, not from the point of view of a doer, but rather of a description about something that might happen, think about the concepts. right? It could be words that I say. Just think about what has been mentioned in the talks. What it's saying is not you need to think about the concepts. It's saying what might happen is that tomorrow or later on today, thinking about the concepts might happen. Because the concepts were delivered in satsang, which is new conditioning. The new conditioning becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning. And the thinking is simply an output of your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And therefore, thinking about the concepts might happen. The phrasing that says, Peter, whenever you can, think about the concepts. That is new conditioning, not an instruction to Peter, a doer. Well, that's enough of that. Take some questions. Hi, Cecilia.
Hello, Rod.
Hello, Rod.
Thank you very much for what you do, first of all. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And I'm going to try and ask the question, although it's really hard to really talk about these things because they are really beyond words. I'm, for my body-mind complex, surrender resonates better with my body-mind complex, the body-mind complex that I am, than self-inquiry. So I wanted to say that. I'm perfectly aware that I am not the body, I am not the mind. I'm also aware that there is no one to understand anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like because I have the intention or I see it as an end, but I seek like liberation, in the sense that I would like to be able to engage better in a practice, in a second by second practice that would allow me more and more to abide in the I am. In other words, to really divest until there really is no one to understand anything. And that I hate to say I, because it's still the body-mind complex. And I just asking, how can what is the practice that I can engage in, as I said, second by second, so that becomes ever clearer and I can just be. Because the mind body will take care of itself. It will continue functioning irrespectively of the consciousness, the witness that I am of that. I'm sorry, it's like I can't really find excuse me, I can't really find the words, because it's, no matter how much we talk about this, it's still the body-mind complex articulating, right? But I hope you understand.
Yeah, I get it. That's good. So your practice can be the practice of having no practice.
Okay.
Because the doer or the part that suffers sounds like it wants a practice so that it can do the end of suffering, right? So what can I do? What practice can I do to get me to a point where there is no me?
I just want That's all.
Say it again.
I just want beingness. I don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
I don't want to do anything. I just.
Yeah. So that's why beingness is the end of the practicer and the end of the practice. So if you ask what practice can I have, I suggest the practice of no practice, which is to realize there is nothing to do. There is no practice to do. And that in itself could be a practice, as in it could come up repeatedly, the thought, whenever you find yourself overly concerned with being, you might realize, my practice is to come back here where I have the practice of no practice. Because it's that, even that desire, the desire for liberation is one of the ultimate hurdles that has to be overcome. And we don't realize that, desire for freedom, desire for beingness in itself is an obstacle that has to be overcome. Because it's a very well disguised form of suffering, because it seems so well intentioned, right? It seems like such a noble pursuit. And so it's only when we really start to see the doership and the attachment to outcome in that noble pursuit that it makes sense for us to have the practice of no practice. So I think I won't say any more on it, because I really think that the question was answered with that. Now, maybe you can re-listen to the recording, but I think that's important, because the practice of no practice.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm doing very well. How are you?
Pretty good. So, as I've been listening to these talks, a lot of the unnecessary stuff has fallen away, where I'm much more peaceful and relaxed in my daily activities. One thing that hasn't is this feeling, I guess, of nervousness or anxiety around strangers or when I'm meeting new people, like, the generic social anxiety. And like this has been like around me for like a while, so I have a feeling it's more deeply rooted than some of the other stuff that fell away. But I feel like I've done like on the intellectual level, this understanding has like gone in pretty deep, but it's just like there's still like this residue left over here that needs to be cleaned up. So
well, you see, I was thinking the opposite. Don't worry about the residue. My view is like, if you look at the anxiety more as a biological reaction in this sense, even if it is suffering, if you just look at it as a happening, more like, say, you're a timid person or a shy person, and interactions make you feel awkward or uncomfortable or anxious. And really the attitude is, oh, this is my personality. And the attachment to outcome says, oh, I need to have a good personality, or, not be anxious. And really the dissolving of the doer, which is, as you say, happening, and it's happened in other areas, it's always because we end up saying, who cares? The beginning of the dissolving of any problem is when we stop being particularly interested in it. And the reason we stop being interested in it is not because we've lost interest, but rather because the one that was interested in it is dissolving. And what that means is now there is more of the attitude that says, well, that's just who I am. At least on a biological or psychological level, there is anxiety. So I'm just let it be.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And it's not like a huge deal that I'm trying to like fix, you know. It's like at the end of the day, if it's like if I can't do anything about it, I'm fine saying like it is the way it is.
Mm.
We'll just see how it goes. But what I wanted to get at was, uh, is there any use of sitting in like meditation and like being with the I am? Because I've heard of like, you know, if you sit like that, like I read on Wikipedia, apparently Nisargadatta, he said that he used to sit for hours with the I am, and like peace and all embracing joy became his nature. So I'm wondering, like, would spending time like that help loosen up some of the other stuff?
Yeah, don't take things too literally. Nisargadatta, from what I've seen, wasn't a perfect manifestation of what was it, all encompassing joy. I mean, I know what he basically meant is, I believe what he meant is, given he's sort of in the same lineage,
Mhm,
referring to all encompassing joy as unbroken peace of mind, right? A serenity, not as in a feeling of serenity, but a detachment, essentially, which means non-identification with so many things that we were previously identified with in a way that would make us feel uncomfortable. So what the satsang today was about. And in itself, which he might have used in particular satsangs, but if we listen to it in an overall context of understanding what he was saying in a broader context, we'd realize it wasn't about a feeling of joy.
mhm,
And even that very fact that we read around the place and teachings include things like joy and love, at some that it's very useful, and at some point it becomes this huge expectation about what liberation is. But anyway, going back onto your question about, is there a benefit in meditating and abiding in I am, and in relation to your anxiety? And I'd say absolutely, if that happens. But the problem with me saying that is then you might turn it into I have to then do the meditating diligently, and that's the answer. But you may not. Also, it may land very much as something that either happens or doesn't happen, and your attitude is, oh well, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. In meditating, if it happens, what we find is a groundedness in a formless sense of self that is beyond form, essentially, beyond time and form, because the meditative state often is with eyes closed, especially as we're sort of engaging in it as part of the process. Often it's with eyes closed. The world of form largely disappears at first, simply because the visuals are no longer there. And then as we become more and more present with the inner state, it might actually occur to us that we're still thinking about the world of form. So the visuals have gone, but we might still be thinking of ourselves as a person sitting in a chair, meditating in a room. And when that becomes apparent, our meditation can go much deeper, because not only does the visual sense of form of the world fall away when we close our eyes, but when the thinking, very unconscious thinking, that sort of keeps us in the setting that we are remembering from when our eyes were open, when that's seen as being there, and it falls away. And the way that thinking falls away is for us to focus on what really is. And in the meditative state, if you bring your attention to essentially what, from a frame of reference of the body, would be the back of your the third eye, or the center of your eyebrow. And when you look there, what you'll find, if you look beyond the imagination of the frame of reference of the body, you find yourself in that there's a vast open space there, an empty, formless space. And the more that there is attention on that, not from the point of view of the body, because you realize in that space there is no body, and hopefully the idea that there is a room and a world and a body and all of that, we can pick that up later. But for now, it's meditation is to be with what is. And the world of form has dissolved. Now, me talking about it, for some people, it's going to be the right time, and someone else in meditation in that world of form, the residual self-image, the visual we have that we've known ourself as exclusively for our whole life, which is essentially the body relative to the world of form, gets so easily and carried into the meditative state. And even though I've described the fact that we can see beyond it and see that there is no person as we've known ourselves in the meditation state, it may still persist until it doesn't. But once it doesn't, and we start finding deeper meditative states which reveal much more of the primal parts of the human being, or the primal aspects of consciousness, essentially being and awareness, because that is what exists in that vast open space. Is there's no form, no visuals, even sound can fall away. But what doesn't fall away is the sense of I am, or the sense of existence. Not I am as I am Roger, the personality, but the very basic I that Ramana Maharshi used to refer to as I. So the impersonal sense of I, which a lot of people don't like. They can't understand why you would use the word I, because for them, I means me as I, the personality, and I, the doer, and I, the problem in seeking. And seeking is about the falling away of the I. But it's really about the falling away of the doer, the me, the attachment, and the primal consciousness does have this undeniable sense of existence. And once our vocabulary has got itself away from the me, the word me that fits that impersonal sense of existence is I am. I don't, it's a feeling. And it's like, I don't know what I am. In the meditation, the I amness doesn't tell us what I am, where it's coming from. It doesn't say whether the I amness is coming from a body, or coming from God, or coming from a computer program. There is just an undeniable sense of something that is I exists. And it's not a thought. It is an all-pervading, undeniable sense that is evident for everyone. Everyone always has it. It's just that the I thought, the me identity, tends to cover the appreciation of that impersonal I up. So meditation is a great opportunity for those me thoughts, the self-image, and all of the things it has to do, and all of the places it has to go, to fall away and to just be with what is, which as we go inward is this vast, empty, spaceless, formless space. And so cultivating that connection to I am basically means that as we move through life, there is a capacity to drop into that depth, not to an extent where we become dysfunctional, but where we can actually talk to people and be resting in the I am. And so in a situation where you find some interaction and anxiety arises, knowing that our true nature is prior to or beyond that anxiety, and having access to move into that place, an access that maybe has developed over the course of months or years or weeks of an ongoing sitting in meditation, not as the doer, but just something you feel like doing from time to time. And so when you feel like doing it, you do it. That capacity to rest in I am means that in your interaction, the anxiety might arise and a capacity to drop beyond it happens. And so the more times you drop out of the anxiety into your beingness, essentially it is a withdrawing of a habitual movement of reinforcing things that we have reinforced our whole life, habits. And so that's where and this applies to the previous caller, that where I suggested the practice of no practice. It's this just dropping into being. Whenever we catch ourselves thinking a certain way, thinking, what can I do in order to develop being? It's just stop and come back to the I am. And so anxiety might be something that can be transcended by dropping into I am. So as you correctly said, Nisargadatta said that his guru advised him to abide in I am. That was basically the only sort of suggestion. Being a bhakti, which Nisargadatta was, even though his guru, Siddharameshwar Maharaj, that suggested the abide in I am was not solely a bhakti, but more into from the jnana yoga path. At that point, Nisargadatta said, well, that's what my guru said, abide in I am, so that's what I'm going to do. And it seems like for him, for Nisargadatta, abiding in I am was something that there was some access to, because a lot of people would say, what is this I am? He must have had some access, or at least at some point after being dedicated to abiding in I am, it started happening. And he said after 4 years of abiding in I am, self-realization happened. Now, those 4 years are not 4 years of continuous abiding in unbroken I am, and then after 4 years of unbroken I amness, self-realization happened. But rather, this intention to abide in I am is simply an intention that whenever we remember to drop back into being, essentially to drop out of the thinking mind, so all of the guilt, the blame, the pride, the worry, and the anxiety, all of that comes from the not who we really are. So the anxiety, if it happens, on the one hand, there needs to be the attitude, as you said, this is what's happening, so there's no need to get too involved in it. But simultaneous to that, there might be the thought, anxiety is not of my true nature, and that can lead to the remembrance, I am, which is the remembrance to drop into the more basic stop and just be. And so I think that's what Nisargadatta's practice for those 4 years is to spend less time in the thinking mind, which is the movement of the not what we really are, the psychological self or the small self, the self with a small s, as Ramana Maharshi refers to. And I am is what Ramana Maharshi would have referred to as the self, one aspect of the self, the existence aspect of the self, the isness, the I amness aspect of the self. And the other aspect of the self, which is the second side of the coin, which I also mentioned was always there in the meditative state, is the faculty of awareness. And so, in fact, we can say there is awareness of I am, and they are not two.
Yeah, thank you. That answer was much better than I could have hoped for. It really resonates. And there was one thing you said. So I have noticed, like, at times, like the back of my head expanding. And you said like there might be like a feeling there, or like in your third eye or something. So I guess it's good to know I'm not imagining things.
Yeah, there's a lot of movement that happens in the system, whatever that system is. A lot of opening up of channels, of energy paths, of beliefs. All of this is intertwined. I think beliefs are very particular energetic forms, and so experience on a experiential level can start to change. The qualitative nature can change, and that can include all sorts of weird physical or energetic effects. I think we'll take another one or two questions. Hi, Sean.
Can you hear me?
Seems like
Hello,
you have
can you hear me?
we have a very bad internet connection between the two of us, Sean. Your voice was all muffled. I'll take another question and then maybe try you just as we go out. Hi, Jaroslaw.
Hello, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So maybe today without video, or can I put my video?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I need to wait. I'm waiting. Okay. How are you today?
I can't complain. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
But I need to wait a little bit more. Okay. So I'm waiting patiently.
Maybe there's.
I can show myself. Okay. So yeah, I'd like to say that at today's Satsang, when I listen to your knowledge, your wisdom, and I am in this meditative state, like just unmoved, like in this position of unmoving. It's so peaceful. I feel like my body. I don't have body, like transparent, just being, and it's wonderful experience. And I'm not sure it's experience. It's like recognize that the recognition is just life, and and I am the life. You are the life. It's like it's just life, and it's fulfilled and whole, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds like yes, obviously not from your head, but more a reflection of the experience, right?
Yes, and I think this experience is very, very humble. It's like, because it's not the doing of the ego. It's for free. You can't do this like by the effort. You just accept. It's more like letting go. And usually when the ego function, it's like they want something and don't want avoid. But this is like wanting cut the life in pieces. Something like that, something doesn't like, and it's unfair. And when you start doing this, it's in your body. There is no conflict, because the body like see its life as a whole. It's like at the cellular level. It's like we are in the flow of in all of what is. So yes. Yeah. The thought is now for the talking. The thought is like the striving. It's when is some like pain or unaccepted things in the body, and when you can like release, letting go, the feeling of body change, as I mentioned before, is more transparent.
And more spacious, more open, more quiet.
Yes.
Yeah. And just to be pedantic, when you said when you can let go of the things that you want to change, more specifically, it's when the letting go happens, right? So it might even be some of the words or some of the way that I am describing, which is just new conditioning. That's just the environment in the particular moment, or even my voice, whatever, I don't know what it is, or a bird outside. And it's much less of you letting go, which is what you said. It's not something that you do, but it's just something that happens. It's like the letting go happens. And then it's like, oh, that's different. So once again, just so that we don't reinforce the sense of doership by, not for you necessarily, but people listening, to point out once again, we don't know why it happens, but it just happens. It could be the words that, and we hear it and we start thinking, oh, there's no need to resist. There's nothing to fix at the moment. There's nothing to think about. It's all God's will. The words can be just reminders that quieten things down. And then we realize, oh, I didn't do it, but something in the environment made it happen. How our whole life is like, these words now are not, I'm not doing them, but they're happening because of something that came before. What your words inspired me to make this clarification.
Yes, as in your wisdom, as you mentioned, you're very rather how to say in English, very attentive, like you say the word patentic, but I'm not so like I think in your way it comes from empathy, that because each moment there can be movement of strengthen this I am the doer emotion, or and different like position, and you in your understanding you see that the better for the whole is to letting go, so not strengthen this idea that the ego can do this, or something do this, let's say this word, but when it's happened, it's just, as you say, it just happened. And so the great gift to see that like you at the moment it's wonderful, and just don't like to block the wonderness by by mistake or something like because in this wonder sometimes in your body there is some maybe I can say in my in this side I can say like maybe some stress in my maybe body, some as I like the mind can like judge this, oh, this is something stressful, and usually when you like be like in this observe mode and just let it go and be very like tender for this, and don't do much hello about, oh, now it's a little bit stress, you just like let it go. It's usually much more beneficial to hold, to like let it be the pain part a little bit at the moment, and see that that's the happening, and don't do problem about this.
That's it. Yeah, that's the end of the one that needs to get involved. Yeah. Jaroslav, it was nice talking to you. I want to just try to see if I can connect with Sean again, because he's tried. So I'll say goodbye to you and see if we can see Sean.
Take care.
Thanks, Jaroslav.
Hi, Roger.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, now you're okay.
I'm next to the window. Yeah, I got cut off last time we were speaking, and I just wanted to say how appreciative I am of your satsangs. It like Holger said, it feels like you're coming home. I wouldn't really use those words, but I understand what he means. You know, there's a really mellow, chilled out atmosphere. You know, listening to you speak.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Lately, my mind's just quiet. It's just, and I think about, I actually try and think about why it's quiet. You know, it's a bit strange, but yeah, it's all good. But saying that, I was on the phone to Vodafone, and I had to phone them 4 times, and it was 40 minutes each time, and they kept hanging up. And I was getting a feeling of agitation and frustration. Now, is that expectation?
Well, it doesn't have to be there. You can have a biological reaction is frustration can happen as a biological reaction, but it won't carry on horizontally in time.
Yeah.
So if there was a story about it that carried on, then that's a different thing. But if it's just they hang up again on the 4th time, and you just, damn it,
Yeah.
and then the attitude comes in, well, this looks like it's my destiny, pain in the moment. The damn it is the biological reaction, and then the understanding comes in and cuts it off.
Well, that's what happened. That's what happened. So that's all good. I wasn't. There was no. Sorry, go on.
Even if it was suffering, which it doesn't sound like it was, the attitude should be, who cares? That was yesterday or earlier today. If we're hanging on to, was it suffering or wasn't it suffering? And then let's say I said it was suffering, and then no, it was suffering. All of that is essentially dragging that into the present moment. So even if it was suffering, if the attitude now goes, who cares? That and then you're present without suffering in this moment, because it's even if it was suffering, it's like, who cares? Well, looks like we dropped out. But saying that, we've come to the end of the time. So see you same time next week.